My name's Neil Cutler. I'm gay out loud and proud, and I support people and talk about people living with dementia. That's my prime task these days.
Could we start with asking you to think about a happy time, happy place, happy moment that as you look back over your life you think, that really makes me feel good to think of that?
Childhood was not the easiest. Father wasn't a very accepting person. He was very Victorian. Mother was fine, but I never came out, and I never really knew that I was gay until I was 25, when I had my first experience. And in those days we wouldn't have any sort of experiences, gay or otherwise, in our own town or city. It was always somewhere different. So my mum said to me when I was 18, I think it would do you good to go on holiday on your own, dear. Why don't you go down to our relations in Bournemouth? She said, I'm sure you'd really enjoy it. So off I went down to Bournemouth to stop with this lady. Her grandmother and my great-grandfather were brother and sister. So she was a distant cousin. And they'd always run hotels and guest houses in Bournemouth. And I really enjoyed going to Bournemouth on my own. She then, at age 60, married for the first time. And she said the person that she'd married came from the northeast, and he was very bisexual and always wanted to go drinking in the Norfolk bar of the Norfolk Hotel in Bournemouth, which was very openly gay. This is in the early 60s. The police knew all about it and kept an eye on it, but it was always very, very well behaved. And I felt, do you know what, I feel comfortable in here. I really like it in here. And so that became my haunt as a youngster. John came on the scene, and within 5 months we'd moved in together. The first 15 years, I should say, were really good, but then he had a nervous breakdown and that changed him terribly. Holidays were always the best time. He always enjoyed going away, and I was more than happy to organise, but it was always down to me to organise because he would never accept any responsibility if anything went wrong. If it went wrong, it was always my fault. He then decided that he didn't like flying, and I think that was a dementia thing as well. So we got a new car and we drove abroad. I used to drive abroad. We went to Berlin and Paris and Vienna, you name it, I'd done it, which I really, really enjoyed. But then when he eventually got his dementia diagnosis, that was a really, really difficult time. That was hard because he'd seen off all our friends. No, he didn't want any friends. He didn't want anybody else. So there I was in Yorkshire. We moved up here in 2002 when I retired. So yes, we got friends up here, but they knew what was going on, so they kept a distance, but I knew they were there if I really, really needed them. But he didn't want to get anybody involved, so I was on my own 24/7, looking after him, trying to keep all the balls in the sky, and it was no mean feat.
What is your proudest moment?
Well, I suppose in a way I was quite proud in the NHS that we actually managed to improve services as an estates department, which is no mean feat. If you're doing building and engineering, grounds and maintenance, it's one of the poor services in the NHS. It's always about clinical services, but you can't give good clinical services if you haven't got good buildings to do it in. So you need to make sure they're properly maintained, and I always maintain that we did a really good job. And in the early 90s, I think it was about 91, just before we became a trust, we had a full health and safety inspection of the premises, all our policies, procedures and things that we did. And we were the only organisation in the south of England that didn't get any improvement notices from the health and safety executive. So I thought, result, yes. And I suppose the next thing was, once John had gone, I just thought, you know what, I'm not hiding my light under a bushel anymore. I'm coming out and let me get on with it and do what I do. And I really enjoy what I do these days. I think people understand a bit more about where we've come from, where we need to go to, but we've still got a lot of work to do. It's not the end.
How do you think the world has changed since you were young in society?
It's moved a long way. It's much more accepting of people generally, regardless of their sexual persuasion or identity. We've still got a long way to go, and that only really applies to most probably North America, USA, Canada and Europe. But there again, there are still areas in Europe that are still very difficult: Poland, Hungary, Russia. And of course, we still have 70 countries in the world where being a member of the LGBT community is illegal, and we have 10 countries in the world where if you're caught in a same-sex relationship, you're likely to get the death penalty. So yes, it's a lot better, but it's got a long way to go. And I would always advise members of the LGBT community, when looking for holidays, make sure you don't go to those countries where you're not accepted. Just avoid them.
Is there any other ways you think society's improved? And what would you still like to change?
No, I think we're on the right path. Things are getting a lot better. And I think we've just got to keep working at it. And we don't need to go over the top. I think we need to just keep moving on slowly, sort of softly catchy monkey type of thing. Pride originally were marches. They're now parades. They're much more inclusive. Everybody can come. It's a good day out. So yes, I think we in this country are going in the right direction.
How do you find joy and meaning in your daily life?
Doing what I do. Yes, yeah. I was helping on Tuesday, Dementia Forward. We were doing refreshments at National Garden Scheme, Open Garden at Birkby. We raised £888 just serving teas and cakes and sandwiches. It was a full-on day. So yes, I really enjoy doing all of those things and supporting Dementia Forward as their diversity, equality and inclusion trustee.
And final question, what role has community played in your life? And how have you contributed to it? How would you sum it up?
I live in a small village. We've got something like about 90 houses. And my input back into the community is as parish councillor. I organise the Christmas fair for the village, and I get involved in all sorts of village activities. So that's my sort of give back to that community. I've only lived in the village 17 years, but I'm accepted by everybody. We all talk to one another. We had 1 or 2 instances when we first moved, but we grin and bared it, and now it's fine. So that's my give back to that community and to the LGBT community. I do the work I do in research with various universities. As I say, I work with a chap called Claudio De Lorito, who's a really lovely chap. He is a research psychologist with the University College London, and I'm doing things with him next year, and we're doing about Commonwealth equality and sexuality, and I'm going up to London and we're co-presenting a seminar on the 12th of March. And I do things with all sorts of people. I'm going down to Sheffield University in October to do some work with a group of students. So yes, I'm always busy doing things for my community.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, is there anything you wanted to say that we've not asked you about?
The one thing about dementia, which is my key sort of speciality these days, is that from an LGBT point of view, we do need to bear in mind that for the gay community in particular, they were classed as criminals up until 1967. So for a large proportion of us, it's our early years. So when dementia sets in, it puts us back to our early years, and it puts us back to scary times when we were coming to terms with our sexuality and what life might hold. In an unaccepting society in those days, you wouldn't come out in those days. And if you were feeling that you ought to follow the lifestyle that was destined for you, you'd go off and do it somewhere else, because a large proportion of us became bereaved from our families. Bereavement's not all about death, it's also being about cast aside from your family, disowned by your family. So yes, so there were many instances of that happened, and even more so these days for the trans community. And of course for people like my John, he was that much older than me, so it was really scary when he developed dementia, put him back to really scary times, especially as one that had built a closet round himself to try and protect himself, because he always maintained that we were cousins rather, that he'd been married, he'd had a daughter, he tried to create this straight persona. Dementia Forward, we do the best we can to support people in York and North Yorkshire. We've got, 6,000 to 8,000 people on the books, of which 10% of those are going to be members of the LGBT community, because regardless of the census, 10% of the population identify in some way or another in that community. And in this part of the world, there are a number of people who've had to go down the straight route because somebody's got to manage the farms, somebody's got to get the children. So when dementia sets in, it puts them back to a time when they weren't too sure which way they should go and were forced down a path they didn't really want to go down. So it's very interesting to follow all of that.
Thank you.
Okay. Edit that to something that's about that long.